Right, okay, so English Literature, paper 1, exam, Monday morning. So the main things that you need to remember are the 3 assessment objectives. So we have got AO1. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're going to be looking at. So AO1 is all about those kind of big ideas, but as well as that, it's about your knowledge of the text. So on Monday, the text for you is Macbeth, and it is A Christmas Carol. Okay, so Macbeth is written by Shakespeare. Let's make sure we spell that correctly, please. And then A Christmas Carol is Dickens. Okay, so that is AO1. We also get marks for AO2, which is our analysis of methods. Now, this is one that across the board in year 11, we have kind of forgotten about in previous mock exams. So it's really important that we do not forget about analysis of methods. And I'll go through that in more detail in a minute. And then lastly, we've got AO3, which kind of historically is about kind of context, but essentially what AO3 is our themes of the text. And then for those of you that are aiming to get that kind of getting into that grade 6 and above, we need to go beyond just talking about the themes that are in the text, but we also need to use the themes to talk about the writer's intentions. So I'll put there as a little reminder that that's a 6+ there. Okay. So key kind of drivers to ensure that you are meeting the criteria for each of these assessment objectives I'm going to go through now. So these are things that you've got to have in your mind to be using in every single paragraph. Okay, so I'll go through AO1 first of all. So basically, for those of you that are kind of looking at that grade 4 to 5, I'll look at first. What you need to remember to do is in that very first sentence, I really need you to use the key word or phrase from the question, because the examiner needs to see that you are answering the question. You answer the question, okay, and then you're going to get marks. It's as simple as that. So that's what we need to make sure that we do. I would suggest you doing that in your very first sentence, that we've got reference to the question. As I said, that might be a kind of keyword or phrase. So if it's Macbeth, it could be ambition. If it's A Christmas Carol, it could be greed. So we need to make sure that we get that into the first sentence. In order to demonstrate that we've got a good knowledge of the text and kind of that clear knowledge, which will get us up into that level 4, which sits us around about the kind of top end of a grade 5, pushing into a grade 6, what we need to be doing is when we're putting in our textual references, so our quotes, we need to provide a brief summary. And when I don't want you to kind of retell the entire story, what I want is just a kind of maybe one sentence of what's happening in the scene the quotes are from. Because then you're demonstrating to the examiner that you know what is kind of going on around that quotation then. That's really important because it demonstrates that awareness of kind of what has led to that quote and then what is then the impact of that quote as well, or quotes, I should say. Now, those of you that are aiming for your grade 6+ in reference to AO1, you're going to be doing all of these things. So if you're thinking grade 6+, you're not going to ignore this. You're going to do these things as well as you're going to connect the question to wider themes. So let's take, for example, Macbeth. If the question is about ambition, those of you that are 6+ are going to make an argument for making then connections to how it's ambition for power. And then that ambition for power leads to betrayal. Grades 4 to 5, you're going to say, we see ambition in this scene when. Okay, that's the kind of difference there. 6+, you're going to make that connection to wider themes. Okay, next up, AO2, our analysis of methods. So what do we need to ensure that we're doing to ensure that we are going to progress through the levels with this? So I'll do your kind of grade 4 to 5. So people that are aiming for that grade 4 to 5, you are going to make sure that you focus on words and phrases. I call this to the classes that I've taught this year, the kind of like your bread and butter, as in this is what your the basic expectation. You must do this. When you're doing your words and phrases, what I'm finding is often people are jumping ahead to the kind of this means this, without that kind of clear explanation of how you've got to that point. So for example, if you were looking at the idea of sleep in Macbeth, so you might say sleep suggests that Macbeth is guilty. Well, how does it? There's that real disconnect between the word sleep and guilt there. You need to explain that. The examiner is not going to assume that you know it. So the way you do that is you provide the literal meaning of the word first of all. So sleep often means kind of a state of tranquility and peace. Therefore, this suggests what if Macbeth can't sleep? And that's the next bit here. So we've been missing this kind of step out, and we've been going straight to this next bit, which is that kind of therefore this suggests because. And I'm going to highlight this because in yellow, because that's kind of like your golden phrase. That's a real kind of, I'm going to really underline it to show that I really am emphasising it. To show kind of your job is to make the examiners life easier to an extent. They've got hundreds to go through. So that word because, you're signposting to the examiner that you are adding more detail into your response. That it's really obvious then. It can't be missed. But we've got to go through these steps in order to be clear. That gets us into our level 4 with our analysis. Okay, so that's our kind of grades 4 to 5. I think as well that actually grades 4 to 5 can also be talking about contrast. So you're going to be talking about contrast within a single scene. For example, the contrast between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The contrast between Scrooge and Fred at the beginning of the novella. The contrast between Scrooge as an employer against Fezziwig as an employer. Okay, grade 4 to 5, you're going to be doing that. Now your grade 6+, oh sorry, actually, before I get onto that, another key phrasing that you can be using for your grades 4 to 5 to make it really clear to the examiner what you're doing is Shakespeare's use of or Dickens's use of. That is something the examiner cannot ignore. You are talking about methods if you're using those phrases. So those of you that are grades 4 to 5, again, you want to be getting those phrases into every single paragraph. That's really, really key. So now, grade 6+ in terms of our analysis of methods. You want to be looking at things like your symbolism. So sleep symbolises what? But you don't just want to kind of state that. Don't forget about the this suggests, therefore this suggests. Okay, it's really important that we don't miss that bit out. Otherwise, you're not explaining the effect and you're not going to go up through the levels. Because otherwise, all you're doing is you're identifying a technique. You've got to then explain what does it suggest, or this gives the impression. And again, that kind of phrasing of because. The other thing that we want to be thinking about is motifs. And again, you don't just say there is the motif of blood in Macbeth, or there is the motif of warmth and fire in A Christmas Carol. Why has that been used? Why does Dickens' use of the motif of fire suggests what? So it's that is the crucial bit. Identify it, but what does it suggest? And if you want to vary it up a little bit rather than using because, you could use as there. So it's one thing identifying the methods, but we've got to explain what it suggests. If not, we're not talking about the effect, and we've got no chance of then getting up into level 4 or above. Again, for that grade 6 plus, this is where we're going to be starting to look at the text as a whole, and this is really about structure. So we're looking at the connections from a moment to the kind of whole play or whole novella. So connections across the text. So with my group, I've just spoken about the fact that we've got Scrooge describes himself as merry as a schoolboy at the end of the novella, and then in stave 2, when he's a child, he's described as solitary as a schoolboy. So he's a solitary schoolboy. So we could talk about the use of that across the text as a whole, and what is the effect of that, and that's what and in relation to Scrooge's change, and that's what's going to get us the marks to go up through the levels, talking about the connections. So that could be contrast or foreshadowing across the text. I also want you to think about the role or function of a character, or maybe a setting. So for example, the role or function of Banquo in Macbeth is to highlight how someone can remain moral, can have ambition but remain moral, in contrast to Macbeth, who has ambition and becomes immoral. Okay, and then lastly then, AO3. We want it for those grade 4 to 5. We want to be making connections to wider themes. This is the list of the themes is on the key scenes booklet that is on the English Revision Hub as well. So the key themes need to be connected to, as well as connect back to the question. That's really important that we're doing that. Okay, really, really important. And then your grade 6 plus, you want to be doing the writer's intentions in relation to the themes. Okay, so perhaps Shakespeare was trying to, in order to what? Or potentially Dickens wanted to criticise what in society in order to suggest that generosity is what brings joy and happiness to everyone. Okay, and then just a final few little tips, just to end the video then, is that remember that the examiner that marks your Macbeth will also be marking your Christmas Carol. So whatever they kind of think of you as a candidate from Macbeth, they're going to have that view when they mark a Christmas Carol. So we really want to make sure that they think we are those higher level candidates, okay? So really start your Macbeth off strong, okay? Have that confidence going into the exam that you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about. Think about your wider knowledge. Even if you don't necessarily understand absolutely everything in the extract, think about your knowledge of the text. It's really, really good, so use that. We want to make sure that we are addressing every single one of the AOs in every single paragraph that you write, because that is going to help you to progress through the levels quicker. Okay, so if you just do AO1 and AO2 in one paragraph, you're not going to move up through the levels as quickly as if you do AO1, AO2 and AO3 in every single paragraph. That's your checklist as you go into the exam. Okay, and we are aiming for 3 to 4 paragraphs for each of your responses, whether that's Macbeth or A Christmas Carol. Finally, the question is really annoying, and it says, starting with this extract. If that extract comes from the end of the play or the novella, you don't start with it. You talk about the text in chronological order. So if the extract comes from the end of Macbeth, you talk about other scenes in Macbeth first, and then your last paragraph will be the extract. Just make sure that you absolutely must talk about the extract. You cannot not talk about it. Your marks will be capped if you don't talk about the extract, okay? So that is so important that you do that. But please ignore kind of the fact that it says starting with this extract. The only way you're going to start with it if the extract comes from the beginning of the text, okay? Make sure that you are revising your key scenes. They are all on the English Revision Hub. And any questions, let me know.